Alexander Wade had just turned 40. He owned a real estate empire worth $200 million and had reserved a table for 15 at the most exclusive restaurant in New York City. That evening, he planned to celebrate his birthday with business partners, employees, and people he had called friends for years. The table was flawless, fine porcelain, hand-cut crystal glasses, and a tasting menu priced at $300 per person. Yet at 9 o'clock, when everyone should already have arrived, Alexander was still sitting there completely alone. One message after another lit up his phone. An apology. An excuse. An urgent meeting. A commitment that supposedly could not be cancelled. Alexander turned the phone face down and stared at the cake as the flames on the candle slowly began to shrink. Resting his chin on one hand, he gazed into the emptiness and wondered when his life, so admired from the outside, had become so unbearably desolate. Then a woman entered the restaurant. She wore faded jeans and a simple white blouse, and in her arms she carried a little girl of about 3 with dark, curly hair. Alexander glanced at her out of habit, without real interest. But when the woman turned her face toward him, the world seemed to stop. Those eyes. Honey-colored eyes filled with surprise, pain, and a tenderness he thought he had lost forever. They were the same eyes he had left behind 15 years earlier in a small town in New Mexico, after promising he would return once he had enough money to give her the life he believed she deserved. He never came back. And now, on the night of his 40th birthday, fate had decided to collect the debt. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you are watching this video from. Alexander Wade had been born in Taos, an old New Mexico town surrounded by mountains, red dirt roads, and landscapes that seemed suspended outside of time. From the overlooks near the Rio Grande Gorge, eagles glided over the emptiness while generations passed with a patience the great cities had long forgotten. His father was a bricklayer. His hands had been hardened by cement, and decades of labor had bent his back. He left before sunrise and returned after dark, doing everything he could to support his family. Alexander's mother cleaned the homes of wealthy tourists who came to admire the gorge bridge, the mountains, and the ancient adobe buildings. Every evening, she returned with cracked hands but with a smile poverty had never managed to steal from her. Alexander grew up with very little money, but with more than enough love. He ran barefoot through dusty streets, learned to read from books borrowed from the public library, and dreamed of a larger world while watching birds soar over the canyon. And he fell in love. He loved with all the intensity of a 25-year-old man a young woman named Carmen Miller, the daughter of the town baker. Carmen had honey-colored eyes and a radiant smile that made Alexander's heart pound as if it wanted to break free from his chest. They met during the Taos Fall Festival. They danced to country music beneath the stars and, between laughter, promises, and stolen kisses, swore they would remain together forever. But Alexander wanted more. He wanted to give Carmen a life without hardship, without limitations, and without the constant fear of not having enough money at the end of the month. He did not want her to spend her life cleaning other people's homes, as his mother had. He wanted to prove that a boy born in a small town could conquer the world. At 25, after earning his architecture degree through a scholarship and countless night shifts in bars and restaurants, he made the decision that would change his life forever. Years later, he would recognize it as his greatest mistake and, at the same time, as the event that forced him to discover who he truly was. He told Carmen he was leaving for New York City. He would work for a major architectural firm, and as soon as he had saved enough money to buy a house and give her the future she deserved, he would return for her. They would marry and have the children they had dreamed about on so many summer nights. Carmen cried as he had never seen her cry before. Sobs shook her entire body as she clung to him, as though the strength of her embrace could stop him from leaving. She begged him not to go. She told him she did not need a mansion, luxury cars, or anything else money could buy. To be happy, she needed only his presence, his love, and the chance to share mornings and evenings with him. She promised they could build a beautiful life in Taos, even if it was a simple one. Happiness, she said, was not measured in dollars but in moments shared. But Alexander was blinded by ambition. He believed love could wait while he built the perfect future. He left on an October morning, promising to return before Christmas. He did not return that Christmas. Nor the next. The phone calls became less frequent. The letters stopped arriving. And without knowing exactly when it happened, Alexander stopped thinking of Carmen as part of his future and began storing her in the most painful corner of his past. New York consumed him and transformed him. He worked without rest, learned how to deal with investors, and fought his way into the ruthless world of real estate development. At 30, he founded his own company. At 35, he built his first skyscraper. By 40, Alexander Wade was one of the most powerful real estate developers in the United States. He had projects in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Miami, and his company was beginning to expand into Canada and Mexico. Yet that night, sitting alone in the restaurant he had reserved to celebrate his success, watching the candles melt into the cake, he understood something terrifying. He had achieved everything he had ever wanted and lost everything that had truly mattered. Carmen Miller spent 15 years trying to forget Alexander Wade. She tried to hate him, despise him, and erase him from her memory as one erases a mistake. But some loves are burned into the soul. Time may cover them with silence, but the scars never completely disappear. Soon after Alexander left, Carmen discovered she was pregnant. She was 24, had no savings, and possessed almost no resources. The man she had loved with her entire being had vanished into a great city, leaving behind empty promises that dissolved like smoke. Desperate, she tried to find him. She wrote letters filled with love, fear, and pleading to the only address she knew. She never received an answer. Perhaps those letters ended up in a trash can without ever being opened. She also called telephone numbers that changed constantly. It seemed as though Alexander was running from something, perhaps from her, perhaps from his own conscience. 6 months after his departure, when her pregnancy was already visible beneath her dresses, Carmen finally managed to speak with him. Alexander answered in a voice that was cold, distant, and almost unrecognizable. He told her he needed time, that he was not ready to be a father, and that he had to focus on his career because this was his one chance. He added that he was sorry, but he could not return. Carmen hung up and decided to raise her daughter alone. She named her Lucy after her grandmother and swore that the child would never know what it meant to feel abandoned. She would give her all the love her father had failed to provide. The years were hard. Carmen worked in her father's bakery, cared for the elderly, cleaned houses, and accepted any honest job that allowed her to support her daughter. When Lucy turned 10, the bakery closed. Large chains and supermarkets had destroyed nearly every small business in town. Carmen was forced to move to New York, the same city that had taken away the love of her life. Taos could no longer offer the opportunities she needed. She found work as a housekeeper for wealthy families. Fate possessed a cruel sense of irony. It forced her to clean the homes of men like Alexander, men who had sacrificed their hearts on the altar of success. She raised Lucy in a small apartment in Queens, far from the glitter of Manhattan, exclusive restaurants, and luxury stores. Lucy grew up with few comforts, but she was never deprived of love. She was intelligent, sensitive, and determined. By 13, she was already saying she wanted to study medicine so she could help people who could not afford treatment. Whenever Carmen looked at her, she saw everything beautiful that her life with Alexander might have become. She also saw everything he had lost by choosing money over love. 15 years later, Carmen was in New York with another little girl in her arms. It was not Lucy, who was at home that evening studying for her exams. It was Sophie, the 3-year-old daughter of Carmen's younger sister, who had died of cancer 6 months earlier. Carmen had become the little girl's legal guardian. Another child without a father. Another heart that needed protection. Carmen arrived at the restaurant by mistake. She was working temporarily for a catering company and had been given the wrong address for picking up supplies. She brought Sophie because she had no one who could watch her and hoped she would be allowed to wait in some quiet corner until the misunderstanding was resolved. She did not expect to see Alexander. She had never imagined fate could be so cruel. Or perhaps so just. Life had placed her in front of Alexander Wade on the very night of his birthday, when he was alone and she was holding a little girl who, in another life, might even have been his granddaughter. Alexander recognized her the instant their eyes met. 15 years had passed. Time had drawn delicate lines across her face, and a few strands of gray now mingled with hair that had once been black as night. But those honey-colored eyes were unmistakable. They were the eyes that had looked at him with adoration during the summers in Taos. The same eyes that had filled with tears when he climbed onto the bus that carried him away. And now they watched him with surprise, pain, and something that seemed impossible, compassion. Alexander rose so suddenly that he knocked over a glass of wine. The red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like an open wound. The servers hurried to clean the mess, but he did not even see them. He saw only Carmen standing in the middle of the restaurant with a sleeping child in her arms and the same dignity that had always defined her. A dignity neither poverty nor abandonment had been able to take away. Carmen considered leaving. Every part of her body demanded that she turn around and walk out without giving that man one more second of her life. But something in Alexander's face stopped her. She knew that look far too well. It was desperation. It was loneliness. It was regret. Then she saw the empty table behind him, 15 places prepared for guests who would never arrive and a cake with candles already half burned away. She realized that the richest man she had ever known was celebrating his birthday completely alone. Carmen never fully understood why she did what she did. Perhaps it was compassion, her greatest virtue and also her greatest weakness. Perhaps she was curious to discover what had become of the man she had once loved more than her own life. Or perhaps it was fate, which had waited 15 years to close a wound that had remained open for far too long. Carmen approached Alexander's table, stopped in front of him with Sophie asleep in her arms, and studied him for several seconds without speaking. Then, in a voice far steadier than she expected, she asked, "May I sit down?" Alexander nodded. He did not have the strength to speak. He could not believe it was happening. After 15 years of silence and cowardice, Carmen Miller was standing before him, offering him something he did not deserve, her company. They sat across from one another, separated by the width of the table and 15 years of pain. Sophie slept peacefully in Carmen's arms, unaware of the tension trembling in the air between the two adults. Alexander did not know where to begin. He had imagined this moment hundreds of times during nights when success tasted like ashes. He had wondered what might have happened if he had returned to Taos as promised. He had rehearsed speeches, prepared explanations, and constructed elaborate excuses for why he had run away. But in front of Carmen, every prepared word collapsed. Only the truth remained, naked and shameful. He had been a coward. He had chosen money over love. He had destroyed the only truly good thing in his life while chasing a success that now seemed empty. Carmen spoke first. She did not speak with the fury Alexander expected, but with a calm far more devastating than any scream. She told him about Lucy. She told him he had a 15-year-old daughter he had never met. A daughter who had grown up wondering why her father had not wanted her. Are you enjoying this story? Like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let us continue. Carmen told him how hard she had fought to raise Lucy alone. She spoke of sleepless nights, exhausting jobs, and the tears she had shed whenever Lucy asked whether her father would ever come home. Alexander felt the floor vanish beneath him. A daughter. He had a 15-year-old daughter he had never held, walked to school, or watched take her first steps. He had never heard her first words. He did not know her favorite things, her fears, or her dreams. A daughter who probably hated him and had every right to do so. She had grown up without him because Alexander had been too selfish to answer Carmen's calls, too obsessed with success to return while there was still time, and too cowardly to face the consequences of his actions. He asked why she had not insisted, why she had not tried harder to find him. Carmen looked at him with a sadness so profound that it pierced his soul. In a quiet but unwavering voice, she reminded him that she had told him 15 years earlier during that phone call, when he had coldly replied that he was not ready to be a father, that he needed to focus on his career, and that he could not come back. "Do you truly not remember?" she asked. Alexander was horrified to realize that he did remember. He had buried the memory for years because admitting it meant facing the full magnitude of his betrayal. Then Carmen told him about Sophie, her sister's daughter. Another child without a father who now depended on her. She told him about her life in New York, the cleaning jobs, the small apartment in Queens, and the constant struggle to survive without surrendering her dignity. She did not tell him these things to inspire pity. She told him because he needed to know the truth. He needed to understand the contrast between his life of empty luxury and hers, a life filled with hardship, but overflowing with love and meaning. The dinner that followed was the most painful and, at the same time, the most necessary of Alexander's life. He ordered food for Carmen and insisted when she refused. "It is the least I can do after everything," he said. They ate through long silences, broken conversations, and shared memories. They spoke of Taos, of people from the town they had both known, and of places that seemed to belong to another lifetime. As the hours passed and the restaurant emptied around them, the walls between them slowly began to fall. Carmen spoke proudly about Lucy. She told him about her excellent grades, her dream of becoming a doctor, and the way she had filled even the hardest years of Carmen's life with light. Then she showed him photographs on her phone. For the first time, Alexander saw his daughter's face. She was a teenager with dark eyes like his and a radiant smile like Carmen's. She was a perfect combination of them both, and the sight broke his heart in a way he had not believed was still possible. Then it was Alexander's turn. For the first time, he revealed a truth he had never shared with anyone, because admitting it meant acknowledging that he had failed at everything that truly mattered. He did not speak about the polished version of himself that appeared in business magazines or the admired entrepreneur featured in articles about the country's most successful men. He spoke about the miserable, painful reality of a man who possessed everything and, at the same time, had nothing. He told her about 3 failed relationships. The women who came close to him seemed interested in his money, his name, and what they could gain, but not in the person behind the fortune. He spoke of the false friends who filled his parties and disappeared the moment there was nothing left to obtain. People eager to share champagne but unwilling to offer a shoulder when he needed to cry. He told her about endless nights in his luxurious Upper East Side penthouse. From a terrace high above the city, he watched the lights of New York and felt more alone than ever. One question followed him everywhere. What was the point of conquering the world if he had no one with whom to share it? He confessed that he had never stopped thinking about her. He searched the internet for news about Taos with the desperation of an addict. More than once, he had driven to the edge of town, but he never found the courage to enter. Shame and fear of confronting the damage he had caused left him paralyzed. Carmen listened without interrupting. When Alexander finished, she remained silent for a long time. Finally, she said the one thing he never expected to hear. "I forgive you." Not because what he had done was acceptable, but because carrying that resentment for 15 years had exhausted her. And because Lucy deserved the chance to know her father, provided he was truly prepared to become part of her life. Alexander cried for the first time since childhood. He cried without hiding. His tears fell onto the tablecloth as years of guilt and regret finally broke free from inside him. The months that followed that night became the most difficult and meaningful of his life. Meeting Lucy was a slow and painful process. The teenager had every right to be furious with the father who had abandoned her before she was born, and she had no intention of making things easy for him. Their first meetings were tense, filled with uncomfortable silences and challenging looks. But Alexander did not give up. He appeared every week without missing a visit and without inventing excuses. He proved through actions what words could not establish. He wanted to be part of her life, and he would never disappear again. Little by little, Lucy's hostility began to soften. They discovered that they shared a love of architecture. She had inherited his ability to imagine structures and spaces before seeing them built. She also dreamed of designing hospitals for communities where people had little or no access to medical care. Alexander took her to visit some of his projects, explained how a building was constructed, and promised to pay for her education in medicine, architecture, or both if she chose to combine the two fields. With Carmen, everything was more complicated. The love they had shared 15 years earlier had not died, but it had been buried beneath layers of pain and distrust. Carmen was not willing to hand her heart back to the man who had already broken it once. Alexander understood that he had no right to demand anything from her. He would have to earn back every inch of her trust through patience, respect, and consistency. He began helping her in ways she could accept without feeling as though she were losing her dignity. He paid the medical debts left behind after her sister's treatment. He found a good daycare for Sophie near the apartment in Queens. He also offered Carmen a position in the administrative department of his company, not as a housekeeper. She accepted after thinking about it for a long time, because she understood it was not charity but a genuine opportunity to rebuild her life. And slowly, almost without either of them noticing, they began repairing something they had believed was destroyed forever. They did not recover the impulsive romance of their youth. That belonged to the past. Instead, they built something deeper and more mature, a relationship grounded in respect, a shared history, and their love for the daughter they had created together. 2 years after the birthday night that changed everything, Alexander and Carmen married in Taos, in an old stone church where generations of townspeople had spoken their vows of love. It seemed as though all of Taos had gathered to celebrate the return of the prodigal son. Lucy served as maid of honor. She wore a sky-blue dress she had chosen after a week of indecision. She smiled without resentment and, for the first time, called Alexander Dad without hesitation. He had proven through actions, not merely words, that he was willing to earn that name day after day. Sophie was the flower girl. She walked down the aisle with the solemn and enchanting concentration of a 5-year-old who knew she had been entrusted with an important mission. She scattered white rose petals with every step as the guests struggled to hold back their tears. The ceremony was simple. The pews were filled with neighbors who still remembered the young Alexander and whispered emotionally about the miracle of his return. Life, they believed, sometimes granted a second chance to those willing to become worthy of it. 10 years after that wedding, the Wade Miller family lived in a house on the outskirts of Taos. It was beautiful but not extravagant. Alexander had designed and built it on elevated land overlooking the Rio Grande Gorge and the bridge he had stared at as a child, never knowing that his desire to conquer the future would carry him so far away only to return him to the place where everything began. It was not a mansion created to impress guests who would never come. It was a real home, warm and filled with light. Every room, every window, and every corner had been designed for the people who would live there. Family breakfasts on the terrace, evenings spent reading beside the fireplace, and the laughter of children playing in the garden. Lucy graduated from medical school with honors and began her residency at a hospital in Albuquerque. Her dream was to open clinics in rural communities where medical care was scarce. Sophie was now a teenager. She naturally called Alexander Grandpa and Carmen Grandma, even though no direct bond of blood connected them. They had all learned that love does not require paperwork to become a family. Every year on his birthday, Alexander lit the candles on his cake surrounded by his family and by true friends from the town. Before blowing them out, he closed his eyes and silently gave thanks for that night in New York when none of his guests had appeared. Because if his false friends had come, if the table had been filled with empty people, he might never have looked up to see Carmen enter with a little girl in her arms and destiny written in her honey-colored eyes. Sometimes, Alexander thought as he extinguished the candle surrounded by those he loved, life's greatest blessings arrive disguised as its darkest and loneliest moments. Sometimes, you must lose everything, hit the bottom, and sit completely alone in a luxurious restaurant on your birthday before you understand that everything you built is worth absolutely nothing without love. And sometimes, if you are extraordinarily fortunate and life decides to grant you a second chance you may not deserve, you can return home after spending 15 years lost in the desert of ambition. Then, with tears of gratitude, you discover that the love you abandoned never truly forgot you, that the roots from which you ran are still there, and that they are still willing to welcome you home. Because home is not a place. Home is the people who love you without conditions. The same people who were always near, even while you chased mirages on the other side of the world. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on second chances, the true meaning of home, and a love powerful enough to overcome time and distance, leave a heart in the comments. And if you would like to support those who devote their time, effort, and passion to telling stories that deserve to be heard and shared, you can do so with one small gesture. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for staying with us until the very end.